Welcome to Mind Over Madness. I'm your host, Loomis, and our host, Keith Shibley. Today we have a special guest. Keith brought him up to me, and I believe, Keith, he was on the Navy Yard shooting with you, right?
Yeah. Yep. Shay was riding shotgun on the way to the Navy Yard, and we ended up going in. Shay went in with like the first team of uh, people, and then I stacked up with a bunch of people right after him and went in. So
We'll definitely get to all that,
yeah.
though, but I mean, just take it back, though, to where you're from, Shay, and then how'd you get into, working with the police and all that stuff, and then how you and Keith's worlds collided, and then what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I was actually born in the DC area. But then when I was younger, I was raised in a little place called Louisa, Virginia, which isn't his country anymore. So I was kind of a country boy.
Yeah.
And then I moved up back to Northern Virginia when my father and mother split. I was like 13, which was good. So I went to high school up here because it was really good because it was more diverse than Louisa at the time. When I was 17, a junior in high school, I joined the Army Reserves and went to basic. And I came back, finished my senior high school, which was actually more hard to go from junior high school to basic. To go from basic to high school was just difficult. Then after high school, I went to AIT. And at that point, I really, I was like, I should go active duty, but I wasn't ready. And I just worked as a mail clerk for like two years. And how I became a cop, I never really thought about law enforcement. I really wanted to do the military thing more. My grandfather at the time, by marriage, had fallen and was in a coma for like 20 days. And I actually stopped at the hospital, and there was this big Grizzly Adams looking guy who I knew of and I had never met, my Uncle Harvey, again through marriage. And he took me downstairs and we started to talk. And he's like, "You ever thought about being a cop?" And I said, "Well, not really." And I was kind of on the other side of the tracks for a while. But he says, "Well, they're testing the DC police." So I said, "Well, I said, I might as well." And he told me how much they made. And I said, "I really don't want to wear a uniform, but I'll do it," And I took the test. I surprisingly scored real well. I don't think it was anything saying how good I was. I just think maybe there were a lot of people that weren't qualified. And I got hired. I was 20 years old in the academy, and 21 by the time I graduated. And let me see, that was 1991. I hit the streets in the 5th District, Northeast DC, which at the time was the capital murderer of the per capita of the world, I guess. And it was fun to be in patrol. I was in patrol for 3 years just because it was, if you really wanted to run and gun and do the stuff that you saw on TV, that was DC was definitely. And Keith, I know you were in Richmond. It was the best time to be like that, a cop, and you could be a cop. And I'm not talking about being heavy-handed, but you don't have to worry about getting fired or prosecuted, and your officials actually, really looked after you. That was an early.
Shay, that was 1992. You graduated.
I graduated the academy October of 1990. Yeah. No. I started the academy in 1990. March of 91, I graduated. I hit the streets March of 91. And I was in patrol from 91 to 94. Yeah.
Just to back up real quick, what made you join the Army at 17? Was it something you always wanted to do? What was it?
That's a long story. Yeah, I always wanted to do it. My dad was only in the Army for a few years. He was not a good cop. He'd get promoted, demoted. I mean, he was not a good soldier, but he was a history buff. But every kid when he's growing up, you have this thing. And for me, and the God honest truth, I always wanted to be a Green Beret. It's kind of funny. I think I saw John Wayne in the Green Berets when I was 9 or 10, and I just think that's how a lot of kids start, and it stuck with me. And oddly enough, during my first enlistment, I make a joke of it. I was a supply guy because that's all they would offer me. I found out later I could have gone combat arms, but when you're 17, you don't know. And I was I used to say, the heaviest pipe hitters in the world, the 344th Data Processing Unit. Which, great people, but they are not combat guys. And it took about 2 years, and the sergeant major took me up to Fort Meade and took me up to the old 11th Special Forces Group. So my second year of reserves, I was in Special Forces, but I wasn't Special Forces. I was a supply guy who supported it. And that was my beginning. And then I got out in 94. And the reason I got out is I had just I just left patrol when I was basically in vice, and I
Yeah.
knew if I tried to go to what we called selection in the Q course, I'd be gone a year and a half. And by that time, I was like, well, this cop thing is my career. I said, I'll be back in patrol. And I said, and in '94, there was nothing going on. And the truth be told, and I tell people all the time, I had really lacked the self-confidence to go to selection. And this was in '93 because in the reserves, you had these
So
things called
if
training.
you don't mind me asking, what selection?
Selection for special forces is special forces assessment and selection. Think of a
Okay.
job interview for when I went through it was 24 days. I was lucky enough I got to go twice, but because I didn't get selected the first time.
Well,
But
that's not uncommon with people I talk
no,
to
it's
for
not.
sure.
It's not. But a lot of people, it basically I think of the SEALs and BUDS, or the SEAL training you hear about on the move. Selection's the same thing for special forces. It's
Okay.
your initial selection. They don't yell at you. It's just 24 days of a lot of work, a lot of stress, a lot of PT.
So your buds is
And
called like selections.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, obviously,
Okay.
I think the SEALs. I'm not a SEAL, but I believe the SEALs, their selection process is buds, where you have Hell Week, and I don't know how long it is, and that's where they phase their people out. Ours is selection, and they will, after 24 days, if you haven't quit by that time, you either are selected, non-selected, or NTR, which means never to return. You can't come back. I was a non-select. I was what they call a 24-day non-select, and I could return in 6 months, which I did. But I didn't do that in '94, even though I was probably in better shape, although I was never in really good shape because I didn't have the confidence. Because when I was in the reserves, we kept sending these guys that were just, I was probably 23, and these guys were studs, and they would come back and they didn't make selection. And I'm like, well, they're not going to make it. There's no way I'm going to make it. So, I tell people I didn't go to selection because I had this thing in Vice where I could make detective, and that's true to an extent, but I have to own it. I didn't own it then. I was too scared. I didn't want to fail. I was like, I'm just not going to do this.
Shay, before you get into the vice stuff, on your first
Mhm.
couple years on patrol, what was your first oh shit moment? Like this is for real.
Keith, I don't know if you remember me telling you this. It's a true story. It's my first radio run. It was with Joe Hubert, Scout 154. Joe later killed himself, unfortunately, and I don't know. Uh, Obviously, it was a suicide. He was on the job. I don't think it was substance, but I know he was having problems. And that was before I met you at the task force. But I was in Scout 154, 3 to 11. I'm a rookie. And when you're a rookie, I don't even know how to use the radio. I'm just hearing noises. And it was, Scout 154, 10-8, 10-4, we're good. We're in service. We got a call for an absconder. And I didn't even know what an absconder was. I later found out an absconder is a juvenile that's got a warrant on it. I remember we're driving, not code one. It's just a look out for a guy who's wanted, but this just happens to be a juvenile. And Joe was great. He wasn't one of those training officers like, shut up, don't say anything. He was always had a smile. And I said, what's an absconder? I didn't even know how to use races. Oh, it's a kid. He's under 18. He's got a warrant. So, okay. Well, it's in the northeast side. It's my first ready run. I literally have been on the street a half an hour. Basically, we see this kid walking this way. We're going this way in the vehicle. Joe pulls up beside him. Kid walks behind us, just says, hey, you. And the kid turns around, Keith, and starts reaching for a gun. I'm thinking, so Joe grabs me and guns it and goes forward. And the kid, I think if he wanted to, you know, really wanted to hurt us, he could have. He just turned around and took off running. I
Yeah.
mean, if he wanted us, he had us. And next thing you know, I'm jumping out the car and I'm literally thinking while I'm running, I was like, my God, this is I've been on the street 30 minutes and I'm chasing some dude with a gun who I'm not going to catch anyways because I'm slow as anything to be. They called him, they had the radio. I think he actually had two guns. He dumped them. It was pretty easy arrest. But that was my first ready run. And I have to say, it never got that exciting again for probably another year or so. I remember going home and calling my dad and I said, dude, you won't believe what happened. I'm thinking, this is the greatest thing in the world. And as you know, I mean, it happens when it happens.
Does the job have a powerful effect on your? Does it play a toll on your mind, like when you have to do stuff like that?
It doesn't. It's like playing a football play. You've practiced it, and I would say the more that you've trained or practiced something, it's just muscle memory. It
Yeah.
doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah, for me, I can't answer. For me, no, it just didn't. There were times, like when I was chasing that kid, maybe because it was my first radio run, I literally thought for a second, wow, I'm actually chasing someone with a gun. There were times like in the Navy Yard, I remember I told you this when I went in, because you went in the first floor, I went up the steps and they had all the fire alarm and stuff going on. And I had a thought in my head for a second. I said, man, this is just like the first shooter video games we have to play at work. But for the most part, no. If you're
Were you
focused, you
hearing the
really
shots, like his shotgun
no.
going off?
I didn't hear his shots. I heard the fire alarms going off. But just when I initially went in the building and I'm going up, it was just like they started this new system in MPD. I'm sure you had them in your department, Keith, where it's a big video screen. It's like $1 million video game where it's
The
scenario
fast
based.
routine, yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking, man, this is just like this, but it wasn't. It was for real. That's before we came across any bodies or anything. But it was just, I remember almost in a funny way to my mind, I was like, this is just like the training we have to do. And it was weird.
What about like so your first foot pursuit? I remember, my first like oh shit that adrenaline rush is like you can't buy that shit on the shelf.
No,
Man.
you can't.
That's addictive
No,
in itself. Just
it
like
is.
just
It is.
the high you get off of um,
Oh, yeah.
you know
I think,
chasing it with a gun or whatever. It's just like once you know you're gonna like come out of the you won. Bad
yep.
guys go to jail and you won, man. It's that adrenaline dump is like it
Right.
it's crazy. It's
Oh,
something you can't.
I
You
mean,
just want to do it again and again. But
I think that's why
Well, it's
guys,
life
it's
and
like
death, though, man. That's got to be the biggest adrenaline dump. It's life and
which
death.
one?
it's like drugs too, Loomis. Like you're
Oh,
never going to get as high as you did the
no.
first time.
Yeah.
That
You know,
first was like a shot
and
in your heart.
And I think that's why, I mean, I don't think everyone feels that way. I think for you and me and guys like that we know, that's why we never get promoted. I
Yeah,
think the folks that can't, they don't like that. And that's every human's different because it does have a psychological and a physiological effect on you, either that moment or years later. They get promoted or they're for whatever reason. But guys that want to do the job, whether it's law enforcement, military, and they're what I would call operational or in a maneuver element, we are, and I hate to say that, but you really like the action
yeah,
because if you didn't, you would get promoted, make more money, and sit behind a desk.
yeah.
And that's
Slow
I
death.
think
That's
yeah,
slow death.
it's no different than rock stars, and many of them have drug issues because of that high during the concert. It's no different than professional athletes.
Mhm.
I think it's the same adrenaline. Um, I just think that a lot of people, whether they're not even whether they're firemen or first responders or military, it's an unfortunate adrenaline that can have dire consequences when things don't go right.
Yeah,
But the closer it gets to not going right, the higher the adrenaline rush. I can't explain it.
that's 100% true, man. So on patrol, kick us off with your vice stuff, man, because that's really the interesting part. How you
Yeah.
started and you know what you were into
Um,
when you were doing the vice stuff.
my mentor, Dale Sutherland, probably one of the greatest, one of the top five in my book, narcotic cops in the DC police. Happens to be a pastor, by the way, which is hilarious. Um, uh, I worked with him one night in patrol, and I basically just did my job. I stayed extra, did the paperwork with the guys. He basically said, "Hey, you want to come to the unit?" And that's really, I think, back in the day before you had to take tests, they would look
Yeah,
at somebody and say, "This guy is a worker. We want him." Because when you get to vice, it's not like patrol. You're going out there, we want 10 bodies. Well, they want the guy who's going to stay and do the paperwork. It's just natural. So it's a more of a smaller unit, you know, but you want to make sure it's someone that will share the load and someone you can trust. So Dale brought me on board, and I stayed in narcotics at the district level for, I don't know, 2 years. And then I went to NSID where I made detective, and that was so from 5D narcotics, which was street level buy bust, every day. Then I went to investigations, and I was there, I don't know, maybe 3 years, 4 years.
when did
And
you start doing your undercover
yeah,
stuff?
that, yeah. When was Bush one's inauguration? Was it 2000 or was it 1998?
2000 or 99?
Bush one
Yeah,
or
2000.
Bush Junior?
yeah. It's about 3 months before Bush. It was right when Bush got elected in November before his inauguration. Um, Jeffrey Madison, who was a 5D patrolman, now Sergeant Intelligence, had contacted me and said, Shay, we want to know if you want to do an undercover assignment. And I said, well, Jeff, what is it? Because I've never done narcotics undercover. I just couldn't buy dope. I was not any good at it. And
I can.
yeah. I know why now because
Yeah,
I
I'm
was
pretty
great at the
bad.
intel thing. Jeff said, well, Shay, at the time, MPD Ramsey said they wanted a white male who was single. And I basically said, what's this assignment? He says, basically they wanted me to be an activist. And the reason MPD started this was because after the battle in Seattle in '99, I don't know if you guys remember that, the riots, which was the beginning of the anti-globalization movement. Everything was pushing to the left. And it was basically the beginning of the anti-globalization movement, um, where the left and the extreme left were pushing their agenda, and there were several protests in DC for the World Bank, IMF. One year they arrested like 20,000. So they wanted to get an undercover in there and try to identify the groups that were more militant, not the ones so much just protesting. And Jeff was in a meeting with a couple of the chiefs, and they said, "Who can we pick?" And I wasn't there, so the story says, "I know. Let's take Shay Mattera. He hasn't been in patrol forever." And Jeff said, "He's so goofy, nobody will believe he's a cop." I guess it worked out.
Yep.
So I asked Jeff, honestly, I said, "Jeff, what are my hours? You don't have any. Okay. Who do I report to? Drew Smith. Who else? That's it." Basically, as I always tell people, I walked out of the DC narcotics around November of '99. The only time I stepped into a police building from that time to my undercover assignment is either I was arrested or, well, towards the end, I got in trouble, but I got exonerated. That was it. I was literally off the books. I had a SOC, I had a bank account, I had uh, I had a driver's license, I had an apartment in DC for some time. I was an activist. My friends were activists. Everybody. I mean,
Yeah,
I
so
was.
could you explain that though? Like, getting into that, like, how that
Well,
that experience was, like, building relationships with these now.
yeah,
What activist was it?
yeah. Well, I started out in the ISO, which I don't know if it exists anymore, which is the International Socialist Organization, which is based out of Chicago. And for my journey, I think it starts like a lot of college kids that get, as you would say, introduced to that ideology. You had the internet then, so you could look at like listservs back then, what they were called, and you just go see the local protests or local events. So I just started going. But for the first 2 months, I researched what I could online because I was never political. I was in the dope game for like 7 years. I knew, crack and heroin. I didn't understand. I understood, Democrat, Republican, but I didn't understand the left. And even though studying up for 2 months, it wasn't enough. I'd like to think that I was like a freshman in college who started going to all these, you know, uh, conferences, and that's what I did, and that's how I learned from the left. But the ISO recruited me because there were certain organizations ISO would flyer and say, "Come to our meeting, come to our political meeting," and that's where I started. They weren't very radical, but the ISO was into everything. Anti what is it? The prisoner industrial complex. Obviously, they were against the IMF, World Bank, anything anti-capitalism you could think. The ISO was part of, and they were backed by a lot of the unions in Chicago, but they weren't very radical. But that got me into the local DC community. And then eventually I started leaning myself towards anarchists. And that's where it started to go. Problem with anarchists is they're not organized like a lot of these groups like Greenpeace, Ruckus. Anarchists are just basically by nature, there is no chain of command. It's a collective
Who's
of
that,
people with the
Antifa?
same. Antifa is not an organization. Antifa is an ideology against anti-fascists, but most of your Antifa hardcore people are anarchists by ideology. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, but Antifa. I mean, I've seen people that went to church that were Antifa because they were against um, white supremacists. And, Shib can tell you all about the white supremacists. He was on that side of the fence. But the thing with Antifa, which I've always found interesting, it's each individual's definition of a fascist. If you were to talk to someone who's not political, who doesn't like fascists, they would say a true fascist is someone who's in the Klan or a neo-Nazi. If you were to talk to an anarchist, well, hell, any cop's a fascist because a cop isn't there to protect the service. A cop is doing nothing more than protecting the actual corporations or the industrial complex of the capitalistic system. You see same thing. We're anti-capitalist, but what I define as a fascist, as an anarchist, is way different than someone who defines a pure fascist as someone who's in the clans. And that's where, just like any ideology, you can have someone way over here compared to there.
So you were protesting with these people, living with them, doing all that stuff for.
Yeah. I didn't live with them. I had my apartment and I wouldn't stay there. I would just go back home.
Do you have to build trust with them though? It's not like
Yeah.
building trust
So
with the drug lord, is it?
yeah, this is an easy one. I worked dope. I ran undercovers. Like I said, I never did undercover work, but an undercover.
Keith, member, I just slapped Keith. What the fuck?
Yeah, it's real. The dope world and the gun world is a business, and most cases are made through sources. It's a big game of tag. I arrest you. Keith is your boy for many years back. You flip. You then take me, who's an undercover, to him. Well, you've already vouched for me. Either it's going to happen or it's not. He's got the product. I got the money. We're not going to sit there and break bread that much. And even if you're doing major weight, you might have 1 or 2 meetings, but you don't need to know nothing about me. This is a business. And I'm sure I know the DA has done it sometimes. Maybe the FBI. There have been undercovers that have been what I call living the life or long term, but you don't hear about it that much because MPD didn't do it. Our undercovers came to the office. They were cops. They'd go make their buy. Maybe they were under for an hour, but at the end of the day, they go and assumed who they were and live their life. No, my life was a little different. I had to break bread with these people. You had to live the ideology, go to weddings, take trips, go to parties. That might have been the fun part, but yeah, I lived the life. And that was I never felt in danger. I think any undercover that has done dope or guns, far more danger than me, hands down. I think mine was more of a psychological issue, when I got out of it years later. It didn't bug me then, dealing with these people. Some of them I considered friends, and then I realized they weren't. It didn't bug me while I was doing it because I was probably getting an adrenaline rush like I was when I was chasing a guy with a gun.
Yeah.
But years later, it did become issues.
So how long did you do that?
11 years.
11 years under there.
But not straight. I took a break. I went to Iraq. Then I came back and took another break and went to selection in the Q course. Yeah.
But for other than your military deployments and stuff,
I was Josh.
Your whole police career for those 11 years was deep cover.
Josh Francis Ward. I was Josh Francis Ward. So when I had to take a poly, it was quite funny. I had to take a poly, Keith, after I left the job. And there are certain questions they ask you on a pilot. I never had to take one for the Bureau. And I said, well, I have a problem with this. I got to say yes because I physically did that or I physically did this. And they're like, well, but it was in the context. I said, so they said, okay, so I would answer the question, yes, but it was Josh. He says, that's exactly how I want you to say it. You only say yes or no, but before the interview, I was like, yes, but it was Josh. And then when it came to the interview, it was like, but it was a 3-hour interview because I had trouble. Like, they're like, have you ever been part of a terrorist organization? I said, well, yeah, technically I was because I had worked with Alf and Elf, which at the time was a domestic terror. And I had friends and, it was kind of weird. I was like, well, yeah, but he's like, no, you weren't. I said, well, yeah, I really was.
So in those 11 years, man, and you're feeding information back to the PD.
Yeah.
How many arrests came out of that? Or was it more just a intel gathering?
Intel gathering. Do you remember the guy who worked for the Secret Service that played goalie in the Secret Service FBI game? Gus, I think his name was. You were pretty good friends with him.
Oh, yeah. Gus. Yeah. Gus. Yeah.
I asked Gus, because he was there when I first got there. He told me about, and I never confirmed it. There was a time I had to go to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, but not as an Army guy, the area out there. There was an anarchist convention where I had to stay in an abandoned movie theater for 3 days, and I saw a video of them assassinating Bush. It was a video of Bush, and they put and I had to report that back. And then when we got back to DC, I had to go meet the Secret Service in the basement of some building because my control officer picks me up. Gus told me that year. I was like, Gus, I don't know if anyone got arrested. And I told him about that incident, and he said, yes, there was a case that was made out in Oregon of these anarchists. Did I confirm it? No. Yeah. Did it happen? I don't know.
That's cool.
Gus wouldn't lie, but I never. But as far as actual arrests, no, there were a lot of arrests actually dismissed because they did not. Just BS arrests. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what kind of mental toll did 11 years doing that shit do? Or did you not, or was it until after that you kind of realized that? Did you ever catch yourself like?
Yeah, I did. I've only my wife's actually over there. I've talked about this maybe to two people. You know that I had to see Doc Anderson. So I'll tell it since I don't mind talking about it. I had one incident during my undercover years where I had a breakdown. And then I had the breakdown in 18. So I was in a camp called Camp Ruckus. I've told you about that. Ruckus is an offshoot of Greenpeace. It's a networking camp for activists. You go there and you network. And you have anything from college kids who are just getting introduced to some straight up hardcore activists, like Weatherman Underground type. And it's always centered around a training event. The two that I went to was a mountain one. The second one was a computer one, how to hack computers, how to prevent the government from getting, intercepting your communications. Well, that was up in San Francisco. And I did that for 3 weeks. I remember getting back to my hotel. Well, actually, what had happened is before I left that camp, I don't remember the dude's name. I just know that he lived on an Indian reservation. He said, Josh, there were many of us in this camp that thought you were, maybe a snitch or a cop because I was taking pictures. Back then, you didn't have phones. So, hey, man, take a picture with me because I was taking a picture of the computers and their setup. And, and this is when they're getting ready to put me in the van and drive me out of the camp after being there for 3 weeks. And I had no backup. There was no, 1033. It was, I'm there and I'm a cowboy in the Indian camp here. And there's still, and I'm thinking, oh shit, gig is up. This guy, I'm getting ready to get the beat down. But he said, Josh, but you were so cool and you partied pretty well. We knew you weren't a cop. They get me in the van and they drive me for 2 hours back to San Francisco. It was a bus station. About an hour later, my control officer Drew picks me up, takes me to the hotel room. The PD wants to debrief me the next day before we fly out. And I was in the hotel room. It was the first time I was like Shay. I had been Josh for 3 weeks. And first call was my sister. And then I called Kim Mativia, who was an undercover with me. She only lasted about a year and a half. She got emotionally involved allegedly, and she got out. And I called Kim and I was breaking down, crying. And she said, Shay, you got to get out of it. And yeah, so that was I'd say my come to Jesus moment. And then
why didn't you get out after that? It was just
I enjoyed the job. It just was weird. And 9/11 had already, I think, no, 9/11, I believe 9/11 had already happened. I was in the process of trying to get back in the Army.
So like in the FBI that we had that backstopping or whatever the hell, not backstopping. I forget what they call it. When we had to go like actually see a therapist and a psychiatrist twice a year. Did you have any of that?
Well, that's the problem, Keith. See, MPD didn't. My assignment was started for better or worse under the Ramsey regime for monitoring the radical left, which was protesting all over the city. Think of Black Lives Movement now, because most people that are hearing this or seeing this would understand Black Lives Movement. Go back to 1999, that would be the anti-globalization movement. It was just as bad. It was popping up. MPD didn't have an undercover school like the FBI does. Did we have a shrink? Absolutely. But no, I didn't meet Bev till you and I were at the task force. And
well, I mean, even though they do that, it's like it's
I had nothing.
It's called safeguard, dude. I mean, I was jacked up past last 2 or 3 times I went, but you know what to say, and you know exactly what to say when you're in there, and they made us take that like 300 question psych test every time, but you know which bubbles to fill in. Do you drink more than 2 beers a day? Nope. It's just
what you say. Yeah, that's no, I don't. Yeah. But it was I wish I had that. I didn't, and I didn't. I paid for it later. I think I know I've told you this before. I think like when you do that kind of undercover work, or if you're deployed several times, or if you've been involved in a lot of police things, whether I've always said this to you, it is a credit card. And you are building your debt. Yeah. And someday you pay that bill. Some guys, if you have what is needed, you're constantly paying that bill as it comes, and you don't have that oh shit moment. For me, I went till I was 2018, and the debt collector came, and my world came crashing down. And it was a combination of my undercover years, I'd say about 30%, 40%, and 60% of everything happened during combat. And it just And I even know that the Navy Yard was in there because
Yeah.
I had to talk about all that shit for 6 months.
But
through
Shay,
tears.
yeah, and it's not all the bad stuff we saw or the undercover stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of it is also just the fuckery of the administration that they put stuff on you. And I know you can talk about that too, because I mean,
well, you know how that's why I got
like,
to JTF, because I got fucked with.
Yeah.
I got investigated. They had nothing.
Yeah, man. But it's like, you got to worry about everybody hating you on the street. You come home to a family that doesn't know who you are and gives you shit. And then you got to go to work and your own bosses, the people that are supposed to be on your side, give you shit. And it's it's a world of like just stress and shit that comes down upon you until you find an unhealthy way to release it. And that's
drinking, drugs,
women.
I think some cops gamble.
Is that what happened with you? Is drinking and drugs?
The drug use was actually there when Josh was alive, but that's another story. For the first 4 years, and that had to stop because I went in the Army. But again, I was permitted, depending on who you ask, or I wasn't permitted. And Keith, I know I told you this. Basically, there were no rules when I was under. And then in 2004 or 5-ish, I still have it to this day. I got handed a sheet of paper with 12 rules. One of those rules, they were pretty normal cop rules. Don't break the law, no drug use. I didn't have those rules the first 4 years. No questions were asked. There was only a task given. Get into these groups, get information. That was it. I kind of knew my right and left hand limits. Like I couldn't kill anybody. I couldn't commit a felony without telling, hey, do you want me to do this? But
if they're passing around a joint, you're not passing it up. Huh? But if they're passing around a joint, you're not passing it up.
Well, let me put it this way. As far as recreational drug use, I was ordered to take a random piss test after one of those trips back when I was at Ruckus in California. I don't remember, it was the first one.
Bells start ringing.
I called Drew and I'm like, Drew, dude, I just got called from the clinic. I'm heading to the clinic to go take a random. Just pull over. I pull over. Drew calls back 10 minutes later. Go home. So I can tell you, Drew is a detective. A detective cannot unorder a random urine test. That has to come from, I guess, an assistant chief. I don't know. I was never, but because there were probably less than 5 people that knew what I was doing. I mean, literally, the running joke was when I came back, people thought I had retired, resigned, or gotten just fired. It's quite funny. I mean, I sit back. I'll never forget when my undercover assignment ended. Before I came to the JTF, I went back to narcotics for three months, which pissed me off because that wasn't supposed to happen. And I can't remember this. The admin sergeant says, Shay, where are your eval reports? Because MPD started doing like the eval, your performance. And he opened up. He says, there are no performances of evals for the last 11 years. I said, because I wasn't on the department, and he didn't believe it. I said, well, you need to call Jeff Madison. And I sat right there and I saw him call Jeff Madison, and Jeff said, no, there aren't any. So it was that's how far removed I was. But again, I don't want to say, I am never going to say that it was more dangerous than anybody buying a crack rock on the corner, because that to me is.
I mean, as far as the dangerous part, I mean, yeah, but as far as the wear and tear on your body, that's
a mind fuck.
That's 10 times worse.
Oh, it's a mind fuck, dude. I went to people's weddings. I got to see pictures of people who I remember. I won't say his last name, Rami, and his wife, because he was married to a woman who was a twin. Going to his house and seeing a picture of her baby, the sonogram, and I'm celebrating. And these are fucking people that think I'm someone totally different. You know what I mean? It's just it does become.
So how do you feel when you bust them? Do you feel bad at all or no?
They never got busted because some did, but those cases were small. They were not going to risk, how would I say this, my access for a BS arrest. Now, if it would have been something big, yeah, I'm sure they would have, but there was nothing ever really that big.
Yeah, it was more of an intelligence gathering mission.
I had complete unfettered access to the activist movement in DC and a pretty good access throughout the US if I wanted to. Because if I didn't know someone there, someone knew me here.
Just real quick, because I remember when Big Sarge was at JTTF.
Yeah.
I was like, come here, Shib. I was like, what's up, Sarge? She goes, you're going to like this guy that's coming. I was like, oh yeah. He's like, yeah, man. He's Special Forces Green Beret. He did deep cover. I was like, that sounds good. And then when you walked in the office, I said, who is this homeless looking?
Goofiest looking dude in the world.
He still, Lewis. He still looked like he was freaking undercover half the time. It was funny as shit. But I think me and you clicked right. We clicked right away. We're the same type of cop, I think.
Because we're real cops.
You know,
we're from the same cloth.
But like I was telling him when even like the Doug Story stuff, it wasn't in my natural DNA to build a relationship and then deceive that person. Like that's not me. And I know it's not you. Loyalty was everything growing up was what we were taught. So that was an actual mind fuck doing.
Yeah, but a white supremacist
little stuff I did that it was just like I can't imagine knowing somebody for a decade. And then,
but you kind of got to know that Dallas character pretty well.
Oh yeah.
And then the other one that was it. He said he thought the one dude had 2 color eyes or was making fun of your eyes. The big guy, I think you were doing gun buys.
Yeah, that was Doug's Story.
You had some conversations with him, like broing out.
Yeah, that was Doug's Story. That was
okay. Yeah,
AK-47 dude.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So Shay came up, and me and Shay, we didn't work a lot of cases together. We did work a lot of overtime and surveillance assignments together.
Yeah, but, you hooked me up on those cap games.
If you're on a surveillance assignment, Loomis, you don't want to get stuck with one of these Fed tie, with their suits on and stuff. You want to someone you can actually. If you're going to be in a car with somebody for the next 8 hours, you want at least somebody you can fucking laugh and joke with.
And be totally normal and unpolitical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember the Navy Yard morning, man. I don't know why it was just me and you in the office, but it was just us. And
were you and I the only in the office? Because I don't remember that. I know exactly what I was doing because I know exactly what you said.
I was at my desk. Yeah. I heard the radios come off because they were by Tom's desk. And then Drew comes out and says, there's an active shooter Navy Yard. Get there. And I grab my bag and I look up. I'm like, Shay, there's an active shooter. Let's fucking go. And I don't know what the fuck. You were either eating yogurt or cottage cheese, but it was spilling out of your mouth. And you're just like, stop fucking around, Shibley.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
You're like, stop fucking around, Shibley. And I was like, well, fuck you. I'm going. And I got my bag and I ran. And you were like, oh, shit, you're serious. And then, we got.
I literally was.
We hightailed it there. And, I just remember putting my vest on, man. And I'm thinking, like, why am I even putting this on? Because, the report was AK-47. And I'm like, this is going to go. It's going to go right through this. And you're just like, hurry the fuck up. We got to go. I'm like, all right. And then, we make our way down to the front door. But you can, from your point of view, from the car ride, what was it? I know we've done
You were driving really crazy. I remember that. I think we made record time.
Fuck yeah.
Which was funny because it was probably right around rush hour. I don't know how we got there that quick. Yeah. But going back, it was pineapple. And I remember that because I really believed you were fucking with me because I was enjoying my breakfast. And when I saw it was serious, like, oh shit, this is on. It's on. We're going. But you drove, you got us there safely. And I know you went fast. But what I always found really eerie is where we stopped. Was that 4th and M or wherever it was?
Right there. The gate.
There was no one around.
No.
It was just your car. We get out of the car, it's almost like a movie looking back. Like we're in the middle of the city during rush hour, and I know they haven't blocked off the streets because we got there that quick. There are no cars on M Street. M Street's a busy street. And I remember looking, we didn't know exactly where it was, and we looked down to our right, and I see 2 or 3, 4 squad cars. I said, that's where it is. And then we went. And I remember running down the middle of the street, and I'm thinking, this is stupid, because at the time we thought they had AKs, or we believe they actually had rifles. AK, the exact type, I don't know. And I'm thinking, oh man, we got to get up against the wall. We can't run down the middle of the street because we weren't even quite certain what building it was. I assumed it was the building where the squad cars were parked right in front. I said, if this guy's looking out a window, we're done. And I remember we made it to the corner where Danny Hickson was, I guess he was a captain or an inspector at the time. And I think you came over there with me. I said, Danny, we need to go in. And Danny asking me, are you active shooter qualified? And I looked at the lieutenant who was beside him, and he knew that I'd just come back. Well, I'd been in Iraq and, the Army. And I said, I'm qualified enough. So
Yeah.
that's when he links me up with a hodgepodge of like 5 different cops from
Yeah.
5 different agencies. I don't know who
And
they were
then
from.
when you went in there, he goes, "Who are you?" I was like, "I'm with him."
I'm with
And then
him.
I just,
What?
yeah, I was like, I
But
wasn't going to let you, no, like, I can't let you go in there by yourself.
yeah, you went first floor though, right? Where the,
Yeah.
the security guard was. See, I went to the left of it and went up,
Yeah.
and we came up on the either the second or third. It wasn't the fourth because the fourth is where all the bodies were.
So when you walked in the door, like I remember walking through the door because the security guard's right in the front of the door, so you got to step over that dude.
And he's dead, right? Right there, he's dead.
Yeah, yeah, he was shot like right
Mhm.
here. But I remember going in there, and it was the atrium, and I'm just like, dude, if he's like on the second or third floor pointing down, we're all just done. And I just remember thinking that, dude, like this could be crossing that threshold. I was like, this could be it.
Yeah.
But
I didn't have that because you went into the atrium. When I went up, so we go up, and I'm almost certain it was up to the third floor. We come out, and you know how you had a lot of these bigger, like a big hallway where you have offices all on the outside, but all in the middle, they're cubicles. And I'm just thinking this dude could be behind any one of these cubicles and any second pop out. Or every time we're passing an office, this is where like not a knock on officers, but not every officer, not most officers are tactically proficient like a SWAT guy maybe or a dude that's in the military. But we kept going, like we go and file maybe 4 guys. We go by, past an office, and I keep telling the guy in the back, look at our 6, look at our 6, because the door wasn't open. Anybody, it just, and I kept thinking, I kept, here I am, not a supervisor, but I'm telling these cops that I don't even know, man, you need to look at our 6 every time we go by and face that way. We got 5 guns facing this way. I want one at my back.
yeah.
And just,
Hey, real
it
quick,
was,
Shay,
and then I don't remember if we came across some of our civilians, because you know how that would work. Come across some civilians, and 2 of us would have to split off, or I got to the first floor first. I may have escorted 1 or 2 civilians out, but then I got to the fourth floor, and that's where most of the carnage was. The first body I saw, I will not forget it. It was the dude that was shot in front of the elevator. Remember, we saw the video of him later, where the one guy was in the elevator. Like there was a guy who was running towards the elevator. He got hit in the kidney and he fell. And we didn't know this till later. Like a couple weeks later, we saw the video. There was a guy in the elevator, and all he had to do was take 2 steps out, reach him, and pull him in. And I don't know who that guy was, and I'm not judging him because he probably was some guy worked in an office that's just, scared of his life. Um, and the guy probably wouldn't have made it anyway. So when the elevator closed, that guy that was hit, he finally bled out. When I got to him, he was already dead. And I'll remember that because Will Man Lopez, who I was like, my radio was dying and my cell phone was dying. I don't remember what it was. I'm certain it was my cell phone. I was talking to Will, and they're begging for any information on the outside. He was in one of the command posts. I rummaged through this guy's body and I get his ID, and I'll never forget it. I said, "Okay, Will, I'm gonna take a picture," which was stupid because I took it with my personal cell, and I'm thinking, "Oh my God, Bureau is gonna take my personal cell because I'm sending from." So, but I sent it to Will just so he had it. Looking back, was that needed? Probably not. I mean, it's not going to make a difference. You're going to find out who he is later. That was the first body I came across. And then as soon as you come out of the fourth floor where the elevator is, and you go into that hallway, right there is where it all happened, Keith. You had like the 2 or 3 bodies. But the one I'll never forget was the dude, and I tell you about this all the time, that was in his office. There was a guy sitting in his office. At the time I didn't know, so I'm at the front of his office. You can't see anything. I don't even see the blood splatter. And I'm creeping in and I'm creeping in. And the only thing I remember is there's a fucking cup of coffee with the lid off and the steam coming up.
Yep.
And finally I get close enough and I start seeing blood splatter. And when I can look over this desk, there's a guy, his head's basically gone. He must have been sitting there. I don't know if he was the first one shot. I almost think he had to have been one of the first because he was clearly sitting down. Guy went in his office and shot him. He fell back so you couldn't see him from where the door is. I've always thought, I don't know, but I always thought that was the first guy shot. And then he wheeled around and killed the 3 or 4 that were in the cubicle area.
Yeah, those
had
the
heavy set.
ones in the cubicle were the first ones out.
Yeah.
Other than the security guard in the front, the ones in the cubicle, the black female and
Yep.
the other guy right behind her were the first 2 I saw after the initial one.
There were like 3 or 4 right there, if I remember. you know. But the
And
guy
what
in that,
floor is he on when he ends it?
he was killed on the fourth. The third, I'm sorry, the third floor is where all the carnage was. It was
But
on the fourth.
look, he was shooting, going up steps, shooting, going down 3 flights, shooting. He was just going up and down, up and down. That's why it took so long to find him. And that building was so massive.
Oh, it was huge. It was like 3 blocks long.
Yeah.
The most amazing, and this is not amazing, and I don't mean to seem morbid. Did you tell him the story about the guy who was shot in the back alley? The luckiest, most unluckiest shot in the world?
No.
Oh my God, you don't remember that?
I do remember it, but I didn't tell him. So go ahead.
What was the shooter's name? I don't remember the dude's name.
Aaron Alexis.
Alexis kills the security guard, okay? All he has is a shotgun, by the way. We find this out later. He takes the security guard's handgun. I don't remember what caliber, probably 9mm. For some reason, he's on the first floor. He opens up the back door. He sees a lieutenant commander in the Navy. And the reason I know this is because I interviewed that lieutenant commander later in a brown, you know, the Navy Browns, standing next to a gentleman who I think worked maintenance. I don't remember. Lexus fires either 1 or 2 shots from 45. Did Tom say it was like 40 yards away? Yeah. I couldn't hit it if I was aiming. It was, he just out the window, pop, got, you know, just the worst luck in the world. Not the Navy commander, but the other gentleman was hit in the back of the head, dies instantly. I mean, it just was, it's like getting hit by lightning. It was, you know, why? Why do you do it? Did someone say
No,
why?
I said like, no, I was like, what?
Yeah.
And he stuck his arm out the door and curved it to go around and just pulled the trigger, not even looking, and hit a guy in the head.
Yeah. And he probably could have left the building. I never thought he could have left the building because they were the only 2 in the alley. But and then he went back in and he eventually worked his way up to the 4th floor where Darian Santis and Scott, I want to say it was Scott Williams, the K9 guy, got hit, and 2 other park police. Eventually they just they lit him up right after the Williams got hit in the leg. But the weird thing about that story about the victim in the alley is William Manlopez, who you remember well, was in the command post. They saw the video of this because at one time they thought there were multiple shooters. When the gentleman got hit in the back of the head, the Navy commander took off running. They had video of the alley, but it was very grainy. And they see this guy in a brown suit running like this, like when you initially take off. And they thought that this guy had a gun and just shot the guy next to him. So that's when it went from 1 shooter to 2 shooters. When we got back to the command post, Will had me look at the video, and I'll never forget. I was like, Will, you made the right call. You know, it was such bad video. All you see is 2 guys walking. You see one guy fall. You see another guy take off. It's just his hand, but you could have easily missed. I said, yeah, I can understand. Well, we had found out in all the confusion that guy was a Navy guy that was like 3 blocks away being interviewed by the media. So Will sent me around. I eventually found the guy. I'll never forget. He was surrounded by media, showed him my creds, and I pulled him behind the police line.
I was with you.
Yeah. And this is when we found out that he was the guy in the alley. He says, no, it was just me and him. And all of a sudden, they were talking. If I remember, he says, we were talking, do you know there's fire alarms going on? They didn't know there was an active shooter. He says, yeah. And he says, all of a sudden, his head just blows up, and I take off running, which any normal human being, I think, would do. But it was just, it's not funny, but it's just so weird that him running for his life led to confusion because of grainy video where they thought it was 2 suspects instead of 1 when it was only 1. It was really weird.
And he just did one hand. He just put it out there with 1 hand and shot it.
Yeah, not even looking.
Either 1 or 2 shots, I don't remember, but it was there's no way he was aiming.
No, I got the video.
He just bang. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel sorry for whoever that victim was. It was literally better chance of getting hit by lightning.
I remember, like, after I escorted a couple people out the first time, I saw Aiden, and I went and we couldn't communicate with each other because we all were on different radio channels. I remember stealing. Aiden had a radio. Goes, is that an MPD radio? And he goes, yeah. And I just took it from him. And I ran back in the building, and I started feeding information back to the command post or whatever, because I think it was Dave Golkoff was in the command post or something. But I got to tell him the funniest part, man. So after the bad guy's dead, me and Shay, we lost touch. You know, we didn't see each other for a couple hours doing our thing. But after the SWAT team started showing up, I'd gone in like 3 or 4 times, and I was like, all right, well, it's time for the big boys with the right equipment to go in there. So the front door was like right here, and I was behind a car right across the street, like by the engine. And I see Shay come out, and there's a whole bunch of people still coming out. And there's this really heavy set lady. She trips and falls in the street.
Extremely heavy set, Keith.
And Shay being the guy who's going to save the world, Shay goes, he takes her arm and puts it over his
tries to
leg to try to fire on Carrie Hill. And he just goes like this. He goes, and then he just takes her by the hands and just backs up, dragging her across the street.
Couldn't get her out.
No. She ends up. I couldn't even drag her, man. She ends up. No.
I was laughing my balls off.
Because we had people running across the street one at a time. So here's the building. Here's where the other cops are. So they just have to sprint like, I don't know, what, 15 yards? I don't know. But she was a big woman. I mean, and I don't want to be rude. Big. And she fell halfway between. And I'm just thinking, John Wayne heroics. I'm going to be the hero. I'm going to run in the middle of the open space where at any moment I can shoulder. Yeah, and I could pick this lady up. No, I fell down. I didn't. Never fell down. And it was laughable. But then we got up. I helped her get up, and she made it the other 10 yards. But
that was funny, dude.
That was hilarious.
No, they get heavy. You got to stay away from the biscuit. Oh my God! Biscuit away from 300.
Keith and I talk about this a lot, and it is. You had brought this up earlier in your show about how do you focus, or you don't let the moment get up in you. And I see that too much until the Navy Yard. Even in combat, running, not combat, but in a war zone, you see a little bit with civilians. But the Navy Yard is where I really saw it, because we were helping civilians come out. We would come in. We get 2 or 3 of them, we get them out, we go back in. And you could truly see the fear in their eyes. I didn't feel fear. And it's not that, you just didn't. And I know you didn't. None of us did.
Well, I don't know. I definitely felt fear going in, But then as soon as
you functioned.
As soon as you cross that threshold, your brain turns off and it goes to training stuff. And so it's like, okay, I was definitely scared shitless going in, and I'm not afraid to say it. Because I thought like this could be it, dude. But once you get in that environment and you start doing what you're supposed to do, it's like autopilot, where you don't even really think about it until days or weeks later.
Little task, and I told you the story. I'm sure you had it. We came into one office. There was one woman. There were 4 of us. She was kind of looked Italian. She was shorter, dark hair, probably in her mid 40s. And I remember I said, okay, I'll escort her out. And I remember I said, just grab the back of my vest. Remember our vest. And I could feel this constant shaking, and I remember that to this day, the fear that she was having. But I also remember I didn't know how to get out of that fucking building. I was lost. Yeah. And I looked to her and I literally looked eye to eye. I said, ma'am, look, I'm going to get you out of here. Nothing's going to happen to you, but I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know how to get out of this building. I need you to take a breath and just tell me the best way. But I swear to you, nothing's going to happen to you. Yeah. And she actually calmed down at that moment and, go left, go right. Because you could easily, I swear, and this, get lost in that building. Yeah. Yeah. And, but the fear that was in her eyes, and I guess a lot of civilians, and I think if you look at like 9/11 videos of the people running out of the building, and you see the videos of the firemen, like you've seen the picture of the firemen going up, there is a different look. Because you're like you said, it's the training. I don't know what it is. Maybe we become robotic. I don't know, but I guess it's the training.
But you are building it to your credit card, like you said, man. And I remember there was the last time I was going in, we were trying to take some medics with us.
Yeah.
There was one that she was just locked up. She couldn't go. And I said, ma'am, you don't have to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The medic couldn't go. Really? Seriously, I didn't know that.
It was I don't know, man. It was probably a middle-aged, like 50-year-old lady, but
she just could not go into the building.
I said, go back over there. Because my last time I went in, it was like two of us and the medics were in the middle. But she was locked up, dude.
That's crazy.
But
are you still on the force now, Jay?
What's that?
Are you still on the force now?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I retired. I'm getting a check every month for doing nothing.
I
retired.
Up. Nice.
And Keith knows I retired 2 months before January 6th. I got out of there just in time. The J6 protest. Yep. I retired 2 months before that with the police department.
Yeah, you would have been involved with that.
Oh, our squad was, yeah.
I
We
left.
wouldn't have been home.
Yeah,
We
I
wouldn't
left
have been home
December
for
19th.
we wouldn't have been home
First
for 6
grad.
months.
Yep.
I'm so glad I wasn't there for that. But it is amazing though the Navy Yard, the little things that you remember. Like I remember when we did link up at the end. It was on the other side of the parking lot, and I asked you for a cigarette because I knew you had one, and it's the first time I had a cigarette that whole day. And then I remember this. I guess it was a FBI ERT civilian. You guys need to get out of here. And remember how angry I was about that? I'm like, what? I was kind of like, it was their crime scene. I'm like, I was actually angry about being kicked out of the crime
Yeah,
scene.
and then that we were treated like pariahs because we didn't go to a command post, and
Oh yeah,
we were rogue task force officers, and we needed to go write a report on everything we did. And I was like, dude, that's the part. Like, you've already been through some shit,
yep,
and now
yep.
you're just getting shit on again by your own people. That's the fucked up part
What they
about
say
law.
we did? We self-deployed or whatever
Yeah,
it was. I
we
self-deployed.
self-deployed, and we were rogue task force officers. I was like,
Yeah, but
oh,
our departments didn't think that. And that was a good
that's
thing.
true.
Yeah, but that was the bureau. The bureau, but the bureau isn't a response entity. They can say that. No, that's why they have an I at the end. It's an investigative entity. I
Any
mean,
stuff that you've seen over the years, anything like that, is fucking your head at all, or no?
like what? I'm sorry.
Like some cops get PTSD and all that type of stuff.
Um,
You though, like, do you have any of those like effects?
yeah, I had a 2018. I had basically just a 100% mental breakdown, and then I had to go. Norma Horn, remember Norma?
Yep.
Keith, I don't know how much you were privy to, but it was kind of like your situation. It was all kept under. I had a
You
breakdown.
you ended
Huh?
up. I remember I just came back from rehab, and I remember
Yeah.
you confided in me about some stuff on your
Yeah.
when you were kind of going through it, and then we really
When I was
talked.
chain smoking, when I was chain smoking.
You really talked when we really talked a lot more when you got back. Yeah.
Yeah. So June 11th or June 12th, 2018, I basically had my firearm in front of me, my service weapon, and it sat there for about 2 hours talking to me, and I would unload it and load it, contemplate, not contemplate. Maybe I pointed at myself, probably did. Um, and I don't know, I did that for 2, 3 hours, walking back and forth. Eventually called my sister. She called Norma Horn. Norma Horn came and got my gun. Norma Horn then had me go see Bev Anderson, the departmental, mental health provider. And that was the beginning of my mental breakdown. 24 hours after that, I wasn't at work. I was, instead of going through the department procedurally, because I knew Will Man Lopez, who was the assistant chief, they agreed, okay, we're going to let Shay be in the custody of his older sister. So I basically was in the custody of my older sister for 2 weeks. They took me down to Gordonsville, took all my weapons. I took sick leave. As much as I had my issues with Jeff Janzik, I'll give him an attaboy on that. He covered me. I think Jen knew some of what was going on. These are all our supervisors. But basically, it took about 2 to 3 weeks before the meds. They put me on Zoloft, which I'm still on to this day. I probably don't need as much as I take, but I had a relapse when I went off it, so I'm not going to go off it anymore. Um, but I had a full blown mental breakdown, and it was weird. It was an outer body experience, and then it's the card. I had to pay the debt. Everything I had done, including the Navy Yard, it was like seeing movie glimpses from everything in Iraq to the being Josh, to the Navy Yard, to Scott Lewis, a buddy of mine that was killed. I don't know, maybe 10, 15 traumatic things from law enforcement in the military. And it's almost hilarious. I'll never forget because one time I was laughing. I was chain smoking. I never smoked except when I was in Iraq. I would wake up every morning. I probably could only sleep 2 hours, and I laugh because I freaks me out. I would go to my sister's backyard, which was maybe 10 yards long, and I would walk back and forth for 45 minutes. I couldn't stop thinking, smoking, literally 45 minutes, back, forth, smoke. And finally I would sit down. And I remember it was probably the second week, day 10, day 11, my sister came out and I'm crying. And then I started laughing. I said, stop crying. So I think I'm not a doctor, but Doc Anderson explained to me it took about a good 2 weeks for the meds to kick in, and that's when the therapy started. And then I was going to sessions twice a week. My sister would come. My now wife, then fiance, she came to a couple sessions, and I really learned a lot about um, mental healthness, mental breakdown. I mean, Beth put it best. It's no different than breaking a bone. The problem is when you have PTSD. I think first responders, I know the military's gotten better about it. When we came in, we're old school. You'd be laughed at. I don't think that happens anymore because you look at the suicide rates, and it is a real thing. Hell, I knew guys that I had some friends before I went through my episode. I really, for a second, would have that doubt, like, is there something really wrong with them? Until it happens, and then you're like, oh my God, this is worse than actually breaking an arm or a leg because you can't see it, but it can. I was physically and emotionally affected by it. I mean, I would never want to go through it again. I won't go through it again. I won't ever come off my meds, even if they say I could. Uh, but it was a living hell, man. It was 2 weeks of reliving all the bad shit for, 20 some years.
Before I hurt my back, man, and
Yeah.
I was a pretty constant boozer, but when they gave me that opiate, dude, it like turned that off, and I was like, what is this? Because my head was no longer filled with all that at night. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It was just, I'm like, this is amazing. It was very easy to get hooked on that stuff, dude.
It's so easy. I mean, it's very. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I mean, I was lucky. I only had Xanax. I didn't get it because I didn't have a physical pain, but I would say that I turned to the bottle.